Hello? Before we begin our journey back to the merciless winters of the Middle Ages, I wanted to send a warm greeting to you, my dear listener. Whether you're tucked under your quilt ready to drift off to sleep, or simply seeking to unwind with a quiet historical story, I am so glad you could join me tonight. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time of day it is for you right now, if you don't mind. Don't hesitate to leave a comment and let me know. It's always a great pleasure to see this diverse community of history enthusiasts gathered here. And if you enjoyed this calm, immersive storytelling from the past, please feel free to click the subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. But for now, let's allow the stresses of the modern world to melt away. Let's travel back to a very different time, to a time when the changing of the seasons brought not just discomfort, but genuine fear for survival. A time when winter's icy grip posed a danger most of us can scarcely imagine. Picture yourself in the countryside of medieval Europe. The last leaves have long since fallen from the trees, and the sun hangs low in the sky. Its weak rays do little to warm the sharp chill in the air. The frozen fields crunch under your feet. A light breeze carries the first snowflakes. Winter is coming, and for the people of this age, it meant one thing above all else: hardship. The cold seeps in slowly at first, but it will remain for long months. The landscape will soon be blanketed in white. Rivers and ponds will turn into sheets of gleaming ice. In a time before central heating and well-insulated homes, the promise of warmth was a distant dream for all but the wealthiest. But of course, it wasn't always like this. Medieval winters weren't always this brutal, this unforgiving. There was a time when the seasons passed in a more predictable rhythm, when the arrival of snow was met with acceptance rather than dread. But then, something changed. The climate itself began to shift, ushering in a period that would come to be known as the Little Ice Age, lasting from the 14th to the 19th centuries. The Little Ice Age brought the coldest temperatures and harshest winters anyone could remember. While the reasons for this change are still not fully understood, its effects were felt across the lands. Crops failed. Animals perished. And the icy winds blew even harsher. One of the most famous examples of the Little Ice Age's fury was the Great Frost of 1709. That winter, temperatures dropped so drastically that rivers and lakes froze over. In London, the River Thames became a frozen highway, with people setting up shops and even lighting fires on the ice. It was a spectacle to behold, but it came at a cost. As the world lay encased in ice that year, many who huddled in their homes succumbed to the cold. Yet, amidst all the suffering, there were those who found a strange solace in the freezing air. One such figure was a young student at Cambridge University at the time, Isaac Newton. When the Great Frost hit, Newton was forced to return to his family farm. There, gathered by the fire, he found ample time to ponder the mysteries of the universe. It was this unexpected break where Newton began developing some of his most groundbreaking ideas, laying the foundations for calculus and his theories of optics. Who knows what other great minds may have been sparked to brilliance in the quiet isolation of a long, cold winter. It serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit tends to seek the light. But for many in the Middle Ages, winter was a season to be endured rather than enjoyed. The wealthy could afford thick woolen clothing, plenty of firewood, and a well-stocked larder to weather the lean months. But for the peasants and serfs, who made up the vast majority of the population, the situation was vastly different. Imagine waking up each morning in a one-room hut. The air is thick with smoke from a sputtering fire. Your breath fogs in front of you as you rise from your straw bed. You carefully step around shivering family members huddled together for warmth. The cold seeps in through every crack and crevice, numbing your fingers and toes until they ache. If you're lucky, breakfast might be a modest bowl of porridge or some stale bread. Food stores from the previous harvest are beginning to run low, and you know the long winter months will only bring more scarcity. The animals suffer too. Their coats matted with frost, they huddle together in the barn, their breath steaming in the icy air. As the day wears on, you venture out into the snow to gather whatever firewood you can. It's back-breaking work, and your hands quickly become chapped and raw from the cold. But you know that without a fire, your family won't survive the night. You think of your children, their small faces pinched with hunger and cold, and you press on. This was the reality for so many in the Middle Ages, a constant battle against the elements, a struggle for survival that consumed every waking hour. And yet, despite such hardship, moments of resilience and even joy could be found. You see, the medieval world was deeply connected to the rhythms of nature. The passing of the seasons was marked not just by changes in the weather, but by a rich tapestry of rituals and celebrations. And it was in these that glimmers of light could be found, even in the depths of winter. Perhaps the most famous of these was the Feast of Fools around Christmas time. For a brief moment, the rigid social hierarchies of medieval society were turned upside down. A peasant or serf might be crowned the Lord of Misrule for the day. This lucky individual would preside over a raucous celebration filled with food, drink, and revelry. But perhaps the most enduring human symbol of the medieval winter was the simple act of coming together. In a world where survival often depended on the strength of one's community, the bonds of family and friendship took on a profound importance. If you will, picture a small village gathered in the snow. Smoke from chimneys mingles with the gray sky, a sign of life in the barren landscape. Inside the homes, families gather around the hearth, sharing stories and what meager scraps of food they have. There is a sense of unity here, a shared sense of purpose against the hardships. Neighbors trudge through the snow to check on one another, bringing an extra log for the fire or a pot of stew to those in need. In the flickering firelight, faces are etched with weariness, but also with a quiet determination. They have weathered winters past, and they will weather this one too. And so, the long, cold months wear on. The snow piles ever higher, the days grow ever shorter. But even in the darkest depths of winter, there is a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Because the people of the Middle Ages knew that no matter how cruel the season, spring would come again. They watched for the first signs with a sharp, experienced eye. The slight lengthening of the days, the softening of the earth beneath the snow. And when the thaw finally began, it was celebrated with a joy and reverence we can scarcely imagine today. Plough Monday marked the official end of the winter season, a day when work in the fields could begin anew. Ploughs, long sitting idle, were brought out and blessed in elaborate ceremonies. It was a symbol of the renewed cycle of life. There was a palpable sense of relief and gratitude in the air as the first furrows were cut into the earth. Life was hard, yes, sometimes brutally so, but they endured. They weathered the long darkness of winter, the hunger, the cold, the uncertainty. The people of medieval Europe held tightly to the promise of spring, and now, as the earth began to thaw and green shoots pushed towards the sun, that promise was being fulfilled. It's a resilience that is hard to grasp in our modern age of convenience and comfort. The idea of facing such relentless hardship year after year is almost unimaginable. And yet, there is something deeply humbling in knowing that our ancestors did just that. They faced the brutal reality of their world with a strength and fortitude that was nothing short of remarkable. They found hope in the darkest of times and joy in the simplest of things. And in doing so, they left us a legacy of resilience that echoes through the ages. So, the next time you shiver on a cold winter's day, take a moment to remember those who came before you. Remember their struggles and their triumphs, their sorrows and their joys, and above all, remember the unbreakable human spirit that sustained them even through the harshest of winters. Because in the end, that is perhaps the greatest lesson we can learn from the medieval world, that no matter how dark the night, or how cold the wind, spring always waits just around the corner. And with that, my dear listener, we come to the end of our journey through the brutal winters of medieval Europe. I hope these tales of hardship and resilience have brought a new perspective to your own experience of the season. May you always find warmth and comfort in the bonds of family and community, as our ancestors did so long ago, and may the promise of spring light your way even on the coldest of nights. Thank you for joining me in this cozy corner of history, and remember, if you've enjoyed the time we've spent together tonight, I'd be delighted if you subscribed and shared these stories with a friend. There are so many more fascinating tales to explore together. But for now, I wish you a good night. Stay warm, stay safe, and until next time for another journey into the past. Sweet dreams. When winter's harsh conditions gripped medieval society in its icy grasp, even the most privileged were not exempt from the season's merciless onslaught. In drafty, primitive castles, royalty faced a daunting struggle to fend off the biting cold and keep the palace sufficiently supplied. The logistics of maintaining a royal residence throughout the winter were nothing short of astounding. Vast quantities of firewood had to be stockpiled to feed the roaring fireplaces. Kitchen staff worked tirelessly to preserve meats and grains to sustain the household through the long, lean months when fresh food was scarce. Servants strove to seal every crack and gap to keep the insidious cold at bay. Yet, even the most meticulous preparations often proved inadequate against winter's relentless assault. In one particularly chilling tale, a medieval queen is said to have met a tragic end, freezing to death within the very walls of her own palace. According to chroniclers, Queen Islazita of Hungary was found frozen in her bed on a brutal January morning in 1326, a victim of the very castle meant to be her refuge. Such grim fates illustrate how the specter of death casts its looming shadow over the medieval world in the dark depths of winter. Yet even amid such bleakness, the indomitable human spirit endured, finding reasons to rekindle hope. For the majority of the population, this faint glimmer often came in the form of the feast of Saint Stephen, falling on December 26th. This day marked a brief respite from the endless toil and deprivation of peasant life, a rare, sanctioned opportunity for festivity and indulgence. Central to the feast was the tradition of misrule, a ceremonial inversion of the normal social order. For this one day, a commoner was appointed as the Lord of Misrule, granted temporary authority to preside over the festivities and issue playful decrees to his superiors. However fleeting, this act of permission provided a vital pressure valve for the simmering tensions and resentment spread by the oppressive feudal hierarchy. The rigid lines between lord and vassal blurred for a joyous day where all could partake equally in the feast, games, and merriment. The sense of community fostered by such celebrations was more than just a distraction. As winter's cruelty sought to break both body and spirit, the bonds of fellowship and goodwill forged during the feast of Saint Stephen and similar revelries helped sustain the populace through the worst of times. A chronicle from 1377 recounts the touching story of two peasant families, their winter supplies exhausted long before spring's arrival, who pooled their last, worn-out resources to share a modest meal at the St. Stephen's feast. This gesture of generosity and unity gave them the strength to endure the remaining ravages of the season. Such acts of compassion epitomize the essence of medieval society in winter. A helping hand extended to a frozen traveler, or an extra log given to a shivering widow, could mean the difference between life and death. The shared, grim purpose of enduring winter's assault together shaped a culture of interdependence that challenged the era's often brutal stratification. Yet even the warmest expressions of friendship and brotherhood could grow cold internally as winter's relentless misery stretched into eternity. The feast of St. Stephen was but a small flicker of light and joy amidst the frozen darkness, a momentary respite before the grim, arduous march of January, February, and March. As supplies dwindled, bellies grew emptier, and the cold seeped past even the most carefully tended hearth. The distant promise of spring seemed to fade into impossibility. And yet, against all odds, medieval society endured. It persisted through unimaginable hardship and ordeal, forged in the merciless crucible of winter and sustained by courage, fortitude, and fraternity. While the earth slept and the sun withdrew, they somehow found the resolve to continue. We can only imagine the flood of profound relief and joy that greeted the first tentative signs of winter's passing. The slight softening of the freezing air, the gradual lengthening of daylight, and the hopeful drip of icicles yielding to the sun's strengthening rays. After months of unrelenting struggle, the sight of the season's first lost battles against the forces of light and life must have seemed miraculous to the weary tillers of the soil. No day was more welcome than Plough Monday, the traditional start of the agricultural year falling on the first Monday after Epiphany in early January. It heralded the imminent thaw and reawakening of the land. Even though the deepest hardships of winter had not yet fully released their grip, the ritual preparations of Plough Monday offered a tangible talisman of hope and an assurance that winter would indeed loosen its hold and spring would return. As the snow and frost gradually receded, and newly harnessed plough teams leaned into the soil's first shy overturns, the medieval person struck another blow against winter's receding dominion, declaring their stubborn insistence against nature's whims. In our modern world, with central heating, electric blankets, well-stocked pantries, and resilient infrastructure, we can scarcely grasp the immense fortitude required to withstand the unrelenting ferocity of a medieval winter. While the season's impositions seem daunting to us from the comfort of our climate-controlled bubbles, consider how incomprehensible true winter suffering must have been. And yet, as we complain about the minor inconveniences of a delayed flight or a rain-clogged commute, it is well to remember the unyielding misery our ancestors endured through those endless frozen months. What reserves of resilience and determination did they have to draw upon merely to survive? Their ability to create moments of celebration and camaraderie amidst such relentless deprivation seems almost superhuman to modern sensitivities. That they not only endured winter's ravages but found particles of light within the all-encompassing darkness speaks to a spirit of defiance slumbering within us all. Perhaps the next time our modern discontents begin to feel burdensome, it would be good to transport our minds back to the icy predicaments of our ancestors. Let us try to embrace the opportunity to touch our own dormant reserves of courage and reverence in remembrance of those who came before. And as we curl up gratefully in our warm beds, let us not forget to think of those who battled with nothing but will, fellowship, and immortal hope. As the new year dawned and the Plough Monday festivities faded from memory, medieval life settled back into the familiar rhythm of winter. The fortunate retreated into the meager warmth of smoky huts and drafty manor houses. For the less privileged, winter meant a constant battle against nature for survival. One of winter's greatest challenges was the constant threat of disease, as epidemics could spread like wildfire in the cramped and unsanitary living conditions of the time. The common cold was a widespread affliction, requiring stoic endurance. But more serious illnesses also stalked the population. In an era without vaccines or effective treatments, influenza was a terrifying foe, seizing young and old alike with its fever, chills, and aches. Outbreaks could decimate entire communities. The winter of the Byzantine era was particularly brutal. A severe strain of influenza swept across Europe. In Constantinople alone, thousands of lives were lost. Tuberculosis, another insidious killer, preyed upon those weakened by hunger or other diseases. Not even royalty was immune to the devastation of winter illness. In fact, disease spread even faster in castles and palaces due to the constant coming and going of people. A visiting dignitary or pilgrim, along with their entourage, could unknowingly bring the plague. Henry VIII lost his beloved wife, Jane Seymour, likely due to postnatal complications exacerbated by the era's poor hygiene practices. Children were perhaps the most vulnerable. The harsh weather, inadequate food rations, and unhealthy conditions made winter a truly perilous time for the young. Babies born in the cold months faced a particularly dangerous start to life. In 1500s London, half of all children failed to see their 5th birthday. A poignant practice of the era speaks volumes. The tradition of bone lace involved tying a black ribbon to the hand of a gravely ill infant. If the child died, this ribbon could be used to fasten the funeral shroud. It was a grim reminder of winter's deadly toll on the most innocent. With danger lurking both outside and inside the home, winter was a time for prayer for protection and survival. For those with limited means, even basic comforts like shelter, food, and warmth were not to be taken for granted. The icy grip of winter poverty was cruel and merciless. Firewood, a valuable commodity regulated by strict laws governing the collection of fallen timber from forests, was scarce. A peasant family might huddle around a sputtering fire of dried dung and straw, trying to glean a meager warmth. Shivering animals shared the available heat, their breath steaming in the freezing air. The food supply dwindled to a subsistence level of salted meat, dried peas, and coarse bread. The abundance of the autumn harvest was a distant memory, and the first tentative greens of spring were still months away. Foraging in winter meant scouring the barren landscape for hardy edibles like nettles, garlic, and mushrooms. The scarcity of fresh vegetables in winter led to some very dreary meals. A typical pottage might include oats, peas, beans, salted pork, and if they were lucky, some foraged greens and wild onions for flavor, bland and monotonous, but enough to hold body and soul together until spring. For many, even this unappealing monotony was an unattainable luxury. Storms, droughts, pests, and other disasters could wipe out food stores, plunging entire regions into crisis. The Great Famine of 1315 was a particularly harrowing time, caused by relentless torrential rains that rotted crops in the fields across northern Europe. Contemporary accounts paint a chilling picture of desperate people reduced to eating dogs, horses, and even human flesh. It was said that parents smothered their starving children as an act of mercy. Corpses filled the streets and fields, too numerous to bury properly. While this famine was remarkable for its severity and scale, local crop failures and food shortages were a constant threat. A medieval diet walked a fine line between subsistence and starvation. It was a time of hunkering down, knowing things would likely get worse before they got better. Beyond mere survival, winter influenced every facet of medieval culture. Leisure, religious worship, and even crime and punishment bore the distinct stamp of the season. The sheer difficulty of barely sustaining existence in the bitter cold colored every aspect of life. Socially, winter was a time for relying on family and community bonds and turning inward. The festive gatherings around the Yule log gave way to more sedate pursuits as travel became perilous and daylight was scarce. People looked inward for entertainment and richness during the long, dark evenings. The flickering light of rushlights and tallow candles illuminated scenes of sewing, weaving, and carving. Idle hands were seen as the devil's playground. Industriousness was a necessity as much as a virtue. Winter's imprisonment at least provided ample time for such gainful activities. For those who could read, winter was a chance to curl up with a good book. But this was a rather privileged club, even in England by the end of the 15th century. A modest craftsman's library might boast a Bible, a book of hours, and perhaps some cheerful jests and Robin Hood tales. Only the wealthy could afford the lavish illuminated volumes so prized by bibliophiles. Those who could read would often read aloud for the benefit and entertainment of the entire household. Winter was a time for sharing cherished stories of brave knights, cunning tricksters, and star-crossed lovers. The chivalric news of King Arthur and his court, with its complex plots and noble themes, were perennial favorites, helping to transport listeners far beyond the close confines of their winter shelters. Less wholesome entertainments also served to liven the tedium of winter days. Gambling with dice was a popular pastime, often leading to heated arguments and empty purses. The clatter of knucklebones and the rattle of dice echoed in many a tavern and great hall. Fortunes were won and lost. Drinking was a common winter diversion. The fermented comforts of ale, mead, and wine helped boost both body temperature and spirits. Public houses saw a great trade. The demand for ale, mead, and other wines increased, offering fellowship, entertainment, and an escape from the biting cold. In the quest for full satiety, a final escape to forget the cold. Drunkenness often led to looser tongues and lower inhibitions, triggering lively arguments, bawdy songs, and the occasional brawl. The short, dreary days of winter also lent themselves to quiet reflection and spiritual contemplation. The church held great sway over the medieval mind, and winter was a time to draw closer to God. With agricultural work at a standstill, more time could be devoted to prayer, penance, and good works. The traditional nativity plays and pageants of the Christmas season gave way to more solemn devotions as winter deepened. The devout might undertake pilgrimages to holy sites, enduring the harsh conditions as a sign of their piety and dedication. Others spent hours in churches, silently telling their rosaries, numb from the cold, and contemplating their eternal souls. Charity, too, was an important winter value. Giving alms was seen as a Christian duty. The 7 corporal works of mercy offered a blueprint for generosity: feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, shelter the homeless, clothe the naked, visit the imprisoned, comfort the sick, and bury the dead. In times of scarcity and hardship, small gestures of humanity could make all the difference. Of course, the harshness of winter could also bring out the worst in human nature. As desperation set in, poaching increased, and with people spending more time indoors, opportunities for theft multiplied. Patience often wore thin in close quarters, leading to a rise in assaults and other violent crimes. The medieval justice system was ill-equipped to handle this seasonal surge in lawlessness. Court cases were often postponed until the weather improved, leaving defendants to rot in damp, crowded jails. Punishments could be severe. Fines, floggings, and even executions could be meted out to those found guilty. Yet, despite the grim realities of winter, the indomitable human spirit endured. People found the small joys and moments of cheer they could. The distant promise of spring kept them going through the darkest, coldest nights. The lengthening days of February brought a pleasant respite with the feast of Saint Valentine on the 14th. This ancient pagan fertility ritual, transformed into a celebration of love, was enthusiastically embraced by medieval people. It was a glimmer of warmth and affection in the very heart of winter's depths. The tradition of drawing names for Valentines was well established by the 15th century. Eligible ladies and gentlemen would gather to draw slips of paper from a bowl, sealing their romantic fate for the coming year. These annual pairings often led to cheerful flirtations and sometimes even marriages. Flowers, sweets, and sentimental verses were common tokens of affection exchanged between Valentine's sweethearts. A simple act, like receiving a handmade card from an admirer, could make hearts flutter even in the coldest weather. Winter, for all its woes, could not freeze the fires of love. The feast of Saint Valentine passed as the season's severity intensified with the arrival of Lent. But there was a feeling that the worst was behind them and brighter days were approaching. As snowdrops and crocuses pushed their fragile heads through the frost, they offered tangible proof that winter's icy reign was finally weakening. Throughout the Middle Ages, the relentless cycle of the seasons shaped every aspect of life, and no season left a more profound mark than winter. It was a time of deprivation and hardship, a period where survival was an achievement, and yet also a time of resilience and quiet fortitude in the face of the harshest elements. The medieval winter was a test of the human spirit, a proving ground for the values of faith, family, and community. The winking icicles, frozen meadows, and long fallow fields might make for a picture-perfect scene, but the realities of the season were far from picturesque. Yet, this crucible of snow, ice, and deprivation also forged a character of remarkable courage and endurance. The Middle Ages were built on the backs of those who could endure the worst that winter could throw at them and still find reason to hope for spring. There is perhaps no greater tribute to their stubborn vitality. So, the next time you complain about a delayed train or a muddy pavement, think of your medieval ancestors. Without thermal socks, central heating, or a weather app, they greeted every winter as a battle to be fought with every resource at hand, and they emerged victorious every spring. We are the heirs and beneficiaries of their determination and indomitable spirit. And with that, I leave you to your warm bed and electric blanket. I know winter has been largely tamed, largely thanks to those who came before us and showed us how it was done. May your dreams be filled with gentle snowfalls and warm hearths, and may you awake to a world where winter is more friend than foe. As the weak winter sun struggled to pierce the leaden gray clouds, the people of medieval Europe shivered and pulled their meager cloaks tighter around their shoulders. Winter's icy embrace had seeped into their very bones, chilling them to the marrow. For the poorest peasants, the cruel irony was that the worn woolen garments that felt so oppressive and sticky during the sweltering summer labors now provided little more warmth than a thin veil against winter's sharp bite. They huddled in their huts, shivering gratefully by the meager warmth of a smoky fire, their breath pluming in the cold air. The animals felt winter's bite too. The old draft horse, its bones prominent beneath its shaggy coat, nibbled its share of straw, dreaming wistfully of lush summers long gone. The milk cow lowed mournfully, its udders chapped and irritated in the freezing drafts seeping through the barn walls. Even the cunning barn cats seemed a little less arrogant than usual, their bellies hollow with hunger and their whiskers frosted. Yes, winter was a particularly challenging time for the lowest rungs of medieval society. But even the nobles, cocooned in their great, drafty castles, were not immune to the season's deprivations. Many a noble young maiden wept in despair as she found her priceless silk dresses useless against the damp chill of the stone walls. The castle kitchen struggled to prepare temperatures warm enough to heat noble, thin blood. It is said that when King Henry of England was caught by a fierce winter ague, he had an entire chair burned to warm his royal hips for a blessed moment or two. His servants were desperate. They knew their majesties' patience could ignite as quickly as the troublesome piece of furniture. But for both peasant and king, winter seemed to stretch on into eternity, the relentless grind of frozen misery. The only respites were the occasional celebration or feast day, joyful little islands in the dark ocean of winter. People cherished these moments of light and cheer like a drowning man gasping for air. Perhaps the most anticipated was the feast of Saint Stephen on December 26th. It was a day of boundless merriment and gleefully sanctioned topsy-turvy fortune. According to an old tradition, a common peasant would be crowned the Lord of Misrule for the day, merrily ruling over his own superiors as a piece of approved rebellion. The boisterous laughter that must have erupted as the lowest serf issued mocking decrees to the local baron with impunity is something to behold. For one glorious day, the normal rules and hierarchies dissolved, and everyone partook equally in the feast, games, and fun. The freezing hardship of winter was beaten back by the bright flame of communal joy. But all too soon, the merry festivities would end. The misrule would be righted, and the cold, hard reality of winter would descend once more. People would return to their hearths and their tasks, thinking the wind's bite was somehow sharper. They would find themselves on the icy slopes of hardship again and again. The slopes of winter were littered with the promise of spring and easier times. The grim siege of winter wore on relentlessly. And yet, even in the bleakest depths of winter, there were quiet acts of courage and compassion that the cold could not freeze. Neighbors shared their meager supplies with those even less fortunate, displaying a generosity of spirit that no decree could ever enforce. The weary Dame Matilda was said to have once given her only cloak to a poor beggar woman, shivering herself on the long walk home. When asked why she had deprived herself of her only defense against the cruel cold, she simply smiled coolly and said, "The warmth of human kindness is a fire that never goes out." Such self-sacrifice, such nobility of spirit, was the secret weapon with which medieval people armed themselves against winter's relentless siege. For winter could freeze their fingers and toes, but it could not touch the invincible summer that reigned eternally in their hearts. And so they endured. So they persevered. In their own way, they triumphed over the harshest of seasons. The first green buds of spring were not just a pleasant sight. They were living proof of the tenacity of the human will, a testament to the indomitable spirit that could outlast any winter, no matter how dark or cold. As we curl up deeper under our warm electric blankets, perhaps we should remember the hardships and triumphs of our medieval ancestors. For in their unending war against the elements, in their stubborn refusal to bow to nature's capricious wrath, they forged a legacy of resilience that still warms us today. The cold winds of winter still howl outside our windows. But if they could face the bitter cold with little more than a cloak and an inextinguishable human spirit, then surely we can hold on until spring arrives. In the end, when the icy grip of winter finally began to loosen, the people of the Middle Ages eagerly awaited the return of better weather. Having endured months of freezing cold, their bellies rumbling with meager winter provisions, there was cause for celebration across the lands as the sun stayed in the sky a little longer each day and shone upon the melting snow. People emerged from their winter cocoons, blinking in the bright spring light. Bears awoke from hibernation. Children burst from their homes, enjoying the feel of fresh scents on their faces instead of the sharp bite of the winter wind. They ran through the slushy mud with joyful laughter, admiring the leaves of the first brave crocuses pushing through the thawing earth. In the fields, the farmers eagerly awaited Plough Monday, the traditional start of the agricultural year falling on the first Monday after Epiphany in early January. It signaled that the land had softened enough to be broken. Draft horses and oxen were harnessed to plows, decorated with wreaths and bright ribbons, and paraded through the village streets. Church bells rang out joyfully as the procession passed. It was a festive commencement to the growing season ahead. There was a palpable sense of relief as chimneys once again puffed smoke. They were no longer choked with snow and ice. The threat of freezing and illness vanished with the snowdrifts. Faces, once creased with the stress of winter survival, were now creased with hopeful smiles. Soon, the vibrant produce of spring and summer would replace the bland preserved grains and hard cheese that had barely sustained them through the long, dark months. From our modern perspective, it is perhaps difficult to imagine how significant this seasonal shift was. We might complain about muddy roads or grumble about losing an hour of sleep to daylight saving time. But for our medieval ancestors, the arrival of spring was nothing less than an affirmation of life. It meant they had endured another year, fending off winter's brutal assault, hunger, and disease. The skeletal trees once again cloaking themselves in green were an external reflection of the internal regeneration and renewal felt by medieval people. Some of that exuberance still echoes in the lively medieval folk songs and poems celebrating spring's sweet return. An English song joyfully declares, "Loud sing cuckoo, groweth seed and bloweth mead, and spring th the wood new, sing cuckoo." It carries a pure, irrepressible joy, with its simple yet evocative rhyme. So let us take a moment to appreciate the immense fortitude, resilience, and sheer joy for life that our medieval ancestors possessed. Against the most difficult conditions imaginable, they gritted their teeth and, bound by the ties of their communities, weathered every winter. And when the spring sun and birdsong finally broke winter's oppressive silence, they rejoiced heartily, knowing they had once again triumphed over nature's harshness. As we curl up in our warm beds, perhaps half complaining about the cold outside our windows, it would be well to think of those ancient souls who breathed a deep sigh of relief at the snow turning to mud, who threw open their shutters to let in the spring air, and who met winter's savagery with a determination and joy for life that should humble us to this day. Let their strength be a reminder to us when we face our own bleak seasons, literal or metaphorical. If they could emerge from the depths of winter's deprivation with such defiant exuberance, then we too can find well springs of hope to sustain us. The thaw will come, the sun will return, and we will emerge into the light once more, our voices joining in the resounding chorus of "Loud sing cuckoo." Snowstorms and sharp frosts continued to torture the land. But the medieval person possessed a stubborn resilience. Even in the darkest depths of winter, they found ways to help each other weather the storm. Neighbors shared what meager winter provisions they had with those even less fortunate. They took turns hosting communal meals. Villages appointed young men to check on elderly widows, bringing them firewood and repairing their ramshackle huts. One such widow was Agnes, an old woman with no family to care for her. Her bones ached fiercely in the cold, and her hands trembled as she tried to light a fire, but in vain. She had nearly lost hope when there was a knock at her door. It was Tom, a strapping village youth, his cheeks red from the sharp wind. He brought not only an armful of firewood but also a bag of barley and a piece of salted pork, donated by other villagers. As Tom built a roaring fire in her hearth, Tears of gratitude streamed down Agnes's wrinkled face. A warmth she hadn't felt in weeks seeped into her frail body. Such acts of generosity were very common in those days. The wealthy and even nobles were not exempt from compassion. The local count's wife, Lady Margaret, was known for her aid distributions during the winter months. Though her castle was well stocked, she insisted on sending wagons of grain and preserved food to the poorest peasants in her husband's domain. Some noble acquaintances laughed at this. Peasants were little better than animals. Why waste good food on them? They said. But Lady Margaret was staunchly devoted to her Christian duty of caring for the less fortunate. During one particularly harsh winter that struck the region, Lady Margaret worked determinedly to stretch the castle's supplies. She ordered the cooks to prepare hearty soups and stews to distribute to the poor who came begging at the gates. The kitchen boys grumbled about the extra work, but the head cook, a stout man named Walter, shared his mistress's sense of noble obligation. He threw himself into the task, filling the cauldron with the last of the cellar's turnips and potatoes. The hungry peasants gratefully sipped the greasy broth with lumps of mutton, not leaving a single drop. For some, this would be their only meal for days. As winter dragged on, even Lady Margaret's coffers began to dwindle. She quietly began selling her jewels and trinkets to buy more supplies from neighboring towns. Her husband, the Count, preferred to look the other way, respecting his wife's piety, though he worried they too would be vulnerable in hard times. Monasteries also played their part, opening their doors to the poor and the sick, offering a warm straw bed to sleep on and a basic daily meal of bread and ale. Some even operated primitive hospitals to treat the frozen and the desperately ill. The monks saw this as their sacred duty, a way to imitate Christ's selfless compassion. Brother William, a young novice tasked with tending to the sick in the monastic hospital, was assigned to this duty. Though the sights and smells of sickness and decay turned his stomach, he forced himself to spoon broth into the toothless mouths of the elderly and change the pus-soaked bandages on festering wounds. He prayed fervently for the strength to endure this ordeal and for God to spare him from the worst devastations of winter in his own life. For winter was the great equalizer, leveling rich and poor alike with its icy scythe. Of course, the wealthy could afford luxuries like thicker woolen socks and warmed, spiced wine. But they still shivered in their drafty manor houses and worried about dwindling supplies. Death came for them, too, in the form of illnesses born of winter. The noblewoman Lady Isabel was heavily pregnant during a particularly severe cold snap. She was isolated in her confinement chamber, with every comfort, a crackling fireplace, piles of furs, and attentive maids to cater to her every need. But contagion finds a way to bypass even the thickest castle walls. A coughing kitchen maid brought Lady Isabel a warm drink of milk and herbs. Within days, the expectant mother was burning with fever, her lungs rattling. The child came far too early, a tiny, breathless thing. By the week's end, Lady Isabel, too, was dead. Even the king himself was not exempt. The pious and gentle King Henry VI was said to have fretted endlessly over the suffering of his subjects during the terrible winter of 1433. The royal physicians prescribed him tonics of cinnamon and ginger to ward off cold humors, yet he sank into a deep melancholy. He couldn't get warm, even holding his hands into the roaring fireplace. Some whispered it was God's punishment for Henry's weakness as a ruler. In reality, seasonal depression was an ailment that could strike any human, from the mightiest king to the lowliest serf. As the days gradually began to lengthen and winter's tightly clenched fist finally began to loosen, people allowed themselves to dream of spring. Soon, they prayed, the earth would thaw, and the first tentative buds would appear on the skeletal trees. The great wheel of the agricultural year could begin to turn once more. In the earliest days of spring, on the first Monday after Epiphany, the medieval folk celebrated Plough Monday. This was the time for the first symbolic furrow to be cut into the soil, glistening with frost, a hopeful sign of future harvests. Village men blackened their faces with soot for luck and paraded down muddy roads with their plows held high. They sang rude songs to awaken the sleeping earth. Afterwards, there was dancing, hearty food, and plenty of ale. It was a vow, a promise that the dark days of winter had passed and brighter tomorrows lay ahead. This same eternal cycle played out at every level of society. In the great halls of dukes and counts, minstrels played a merry tune, and couples, flushed with the optimism of a new year, threw themselves into a lively folk dance. The king, too, held a lavish feast for his court. The tables were laden with roasted swan and marzipan sweets. Even the lowliest peasant and his family felt a sense of relief as they looked out over their humble fields, clutching the precious, hidden bag of seeds that meant full bellies to come. The unfortunate widow Agnes, on her deathbed, found herself stirring a boiling soup pot. She was mumbling incoherently. It had been an ordeal to see a spring dawn. Thanks be to God. Winter was merciless. There was no denying this truth. It brought a host of miseries and hardships, from hunger to bone-chilling cold, to the specter of death and disease. But it was also a time when the true resilience of the medieval person and the spirit of community shone through. Faced with the bleak abyss of winter, they responded with generosity, courage, and even defiant celebration. They understood that winter was an inevitable part of life's great cycle, and that the best way to beat the cold was to turn inward and endure it together. So tonight, as you gather under your comfortable duvet, perhaps grumbling about an exorbitant heating bill or scraping a bit of ice from your windshield, think of your medieval ancestors. Consider how they survived from winter to winter in a world without electric blankets, central heating, or grocery stores at the click of a button. While our modern winter woes may seem all-encompassing in the moment, they pale in comparison to what medieval people faced every year, and perhaps we can learn a lesson from them. Empathy, charity, and an irrepressible hope for spring are the best ways to endure the challenges life throws at us, be it a polar vortex or a pandemic. May we all greet the coming spring with full and grateful hearts, knowing that no matter how deep the snow, it will eventually yield to the warming sun. The harshness of winter makes the blossoming of spring all the sweeter. And so, as a medieval king once said, let us winter bravely that we may forever spring forth. The sharp frost continued. It transformed the landscape into a crystalline wonderland. It might have been picturesque were it not for the immense hardship it inflicted on the land's inhabitants. Snow fell ceaselessly from an ash-gray sky, smothering the countryside in a suffocating white blanket. Icicles hung from the eaves of peasant huts and great manor houses like gleaming daggers. The hearth fires burning day and night offered only temporary relief from the piercing cold. The smoke from the precious flames stung the eyes and clogged the lungs in the close, airless atmosphere of the wattle and daub huts. Bodies huddled together for warmth, people and animals alike. The sharp smells of manure and unwashed flesh mingled into a unique medieval winter perfume. But for some, even this dubious comfort was a luxury they could not afford. Meager food stores were dangerously thin, and their bellies rumbled with constant hunger pangs. Many of the poorest subsisted on little more than coarse bread and thin porridge, praying to survive to see the spring. The specter of famine haunted every home. From the lowliest serf to the highest lord, None could escape winter's deadly grasp. Even the crown rulers in their drafty stone castles, which sucked in the cold and exhaled a relentless dampness, shivered under piles of furs. Royal households required enormous amounts of firewood and provisions to last the long winter months. Woe to the kingdom whose ruler did not plan ahead. In one account, a young Bohemian princess was said to have perished from the cold in her own bedchamber. Her death was a chilling reminder that wealth and status offered only partial protection from the elements. But for a peasant family, losing a loved one to winter's icy scythe was as predictable as it was cruel. Illness contributed heavily to the season's enormous death toll. In communities weakened by hunger and close quarters, diseases and fevers spread like wildfire. The stale, smoky air of the huts and the ubiquitous filth made them even more vulnerable to infection. Medieval doctors could do little, relying on dubious treatments based more on superstition than science. Emperor Charlemagne died of pleurisy in the harsh winter of 814 after his doctors treated him with useless salves and poultices. Many historians believe the Black Death of the 14th century spread so rapidly because the malnourished populace, crowded together in their winter quarters, had no resistance to the disease. The pandemic of 1348 to 1349 took a staggering toll, carrying off an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population. A poignant story comes from Pistoia, Italy. A man named Ser Luca wrote to his brother Francesco, describing the devastation. "My heart is sick, and I can barely force myself to write. For things go from bad to worse here. Many are dead, and more are dying. Shops are closed, taverns are deserted. One passes through the streets only with spirits. Cries of grief echo from houses struck by death. The stench of decay rises from the mass graves. I fear our city will soon be utterly devoid of life. I beg you, stay where you are and pray for us unceasingly." As the plague raged, entire villages vanished. The agony of the frozen landscape was compounded by the trauma of hasty mass burials and sick people being sent out to die alone in the snow for fear of contagion. The devastating losses of the Black Death left deep psychological scars and changed the medieval world forever. Winter was a particularly dreaded time for the elderly, young children, and pregnant women. Without the benefits of modern medicine, these vulnerable populations often succumb to the cold, disease, or malnutrition. It's estimated that in some medieval societies, 20% to 30% of infants died in their first year of life, many during the harsh winter months. Pregnancy and childbirth complications, exacerbated by poor nutrition and cold conditions, claimed the lives of countless mothers and babies. The perils of a winter birth are illustrated by the heartbreaking story of Matilda, the 12-year-old daughter of King Henry I of England. In the winter of 1120, Matilda was aboard a ship called the White Ship, returning from France to England. The ship struck a rock and sank rapidly, sending Matilda and hundreds of other passengers into the freezing waters of the English Channel. Matilda barely escaped drowning by climbing into a small rescue boat. But then she cried out for her half-brother William, who was still in the water. When the boat turned back to pick up William, so many desperate people tried to climb in that it capsized, throwing Matilda back into the cold waves. The king's young daughter, who was pregnant with his first grandchild, perished along with the others. It is said that her grief-stricken father fainted upon hearing the news and never smiled again for the rest of his life. The very old and the very young were always in peril during the grim winters of the Middle Ages. Even if they managed to avoid disease and starvation, they could freeze to death in their sleep. Without the ice caps and glaciers we have today, The winters of the Middle Ages were accompanied by violent snowstorms and devastating floods. In 1216, it is claimed that King John of England lost his crown jewels while crossing a marshy area in East Anglia called the Wash, fleeing from rebellious barons. John's baggage train was swallowed by a rising tide whipped up by severe storms. The king was said to have narrowly escaped, but his treasure, including priceless jeweled crowns and scepters, was lost to the turbulent waters, never to be seen again. John died a broken man from dysentery just a few days later. Some historians believe the loss of the crown jewels was the final blow that sent Lackland to his grave. Winter storms often meant disaster for coastal communities, battered by hurricane-force winds and massive waves. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records a terrible flood that struck England on St. Martin's Day, November 11, 1099. A great sea flood came widely throughout this land, and ran so far up as never before, and drowned many towns and countless human beings. Another surge in the North Sea on January 16, 1219, submerged low-lying Holland entirely, killing more than 50,000 people. In an era without early warning systems or emergency shelters, populations were utterly at the mercy of the elements. All a medieval person could do was pray for salvation as the icy floodwaters rose and the wind howled like the hounds of hell outside their flimsy homes. Harsh winters also meant an increase in fires, as people did everything they could to keep warm. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle again gives a chilling account of a deadly fire in London in 1132. A terrible fire broke out in London on the bridge, and it spread so quickly that it burned a great part of the city, and St. Paul's Minster and Canterbury Cathedral, and many other churches and dwellings, before it could be extinguished. The force of the wind and the violence of the flames carried burning beams and lead sheets from the roofs an extraordinary distance. Given that most buildings were made of wood and packed tightly together, it is no surprise that medieval cities were such a tinderbox. A stray spark, or a knocked-over candle could ignite an unstoppable inferno, especially when fierce winter winds fanned the flames into a frenzy. People fled through the narrow, twisting streets as their homes burned behind them, often with nothing but the clothes on their backs. There are countless tragic stories of families separated in the chaos, children trampled, and people trapped and burned alive. With the era's limited firefighting technology, the best citizens could do was to throw buckets of water or snow at the flames and pray for the wind to change direction before the entire city was consumed. Near total devastation was possible, leaving thousands homeless and destitute in the dead of winter. But perhaps the greatest danger of a medieval winter was one that didn't require a great blizzard, flood, or fire. Sometimes it was the simple, inescapable, life-sapping chill. In our world of central heating and thermal fabrics, this is difficult to imagine. But the bone damp and the perpetual darkness of winter were an enemy against which the medieval person had few defenses. With only smoky fires and piles of furs to ward off the cold, the winter chill seeped into the very bones of the medieval person. Arthritis and rheumatism were common ailments, the pain growing worse with each passing year. Limbs would slowly grow numb, then turn black from frostbite. Pneumonia and influenza spread in the close quarters. The cold seemed to seep into the very soul, sapping all energy and vitality. The 6th century British monk Gildas, in his work on the ruin of Britain, paints a gloomy picture. The nights are long and dark, the days gloomy and cold, the air bites with malice. Icy blasts penetrate the bones. Everything is covered with snow and frost. A time of great suffering for man and beast. The whole world lies dead and frozen, as if locked in the grip of a frozen hell. For the elderly and the frail especially, Winter was a time of dread, marked by a desperate feeling that the warmth would never return. People would pile on every item of clothing and huddle together for warmth, but the cold still seeped in. Fires would sputter and die in the damp, leaving behind only the sharp smoke that burned the eyes and choked the throat. In the darkness, coughs and sniffles echoed, punctuated by the moans of the sick and dying. The cold held its grip tight, day and night, turning breath to frost and numbing limbs. There was no escape from winter's grasp in the Middle Ages. There were no Florida vacations or cozy electric blankets to take the edge off. The cold was a constant, merciless companion that drained the precious energy needed just to survive. It is no wonder that the medieval world measured the passage of time not in months or years, but in how many winters one had managed to survive. To reach another spring was a victory that grew harder with each passing season. And yet, somehow, despite the brutal conditions, the rampant disease, the gnawing hunger, and the life-sucking cold, medieval people endured. Year after year, they weathered the merciless winter. They endured, armored only with their indomitable spirit. When the last of the good food stores were gone, they tightened their belts one more notch. When the fire died down to embers, they pulled a tattered blanket closer. And when the darkness pressed in from all sides, they huddled together and whispered stories of brighter days to come. There is a touching passage in the 14th century English poem Piers Plowman that captures the sheer resilience of the medieval spirit. With sorrow and with winter's woe, with frost and with snow, with hail and with sleet, all shall pass and peace shall reign. Hope shall have the victory and nevermore fail. Even in the darkest depths of winter, medieval people found small joys and graces. Neighbors shared the little they had with those who had even less in the midst of the cold and dark. Some swore they heard the voices of angels in the howling winds, promising that warmth and light would return. And so, medieval people clung fiercely to hope. They clung violently to life and fixed their eyes on the distant horizon where spring awaited. In their bones, they knew that no matter how cruel and relentless the winter, it was always a temporary state. The sun would return, the snows would melt, and the world would be reborn green and glorious, as if winter had never come. All they had to do was endure, and endure they did, with a strength forged in the season's ice and stone. The winters of the Middle Ages were merciless, pitiless, and seemed endless. They brought hunger, disease, devastation, and death. But they also brought out the best in the human spirit, the unshakable will to survive, the fierce grip on hope, the coming together in compassion and kindness. The medieval world was tempered in the icy crucible of winter and emerged stronger, a little tougher, a little wiser, with a bone-deep appreciation for the turn of the seasons. So perhaps we can learn a lesson from our medieval ancestors. While we complain about scraping a few centimeters of ice from our windshields, for them, winter was a matter of life and death. It was a season to be endured with gritted teeth and unyielding resolve. And they survived. They passed down to us stories of winter's fury and the invincible strength of the human spirit. In the midst of our modern winters, let us remember their fortitude and find inspiration to weather our own dark days. Medieval people looked winter's icy face full on and refused to surrender. They weathered the floods and the famines, the blizzards and the darkest nights. They buried their dead in the frozen ground and rose again for those who groaned with hunger. But they always held tightly to the promise of spring. And if they could weather the winter with little more than faith and furs, then we too can find the strength to face our own battles, knowing the thaw will come and the light will return. The merciless winters of the medieval world may be long past, but their lessons echo through the ages, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. So let us walk in the footsteps of our ancestors and meet the winter's chill with courage, compassion, and unshakable hope. For if they could face the darkest season with heads unbowed, then so can we. Winter is coming, but as the medieval world knew all too well, spring is never far behind. As the freezing winds howled across the frozen landscape, the medieval people gathered around the flickering light of the hearth fire, huddling together for precious warmth, sharing stories of winters past, those harsh, unforgiving seasons that tested even the hardiest of souls. In humble huts and great manor houses alike, the bite of winter's icy breath knew no bounds. Drafty shutters and thin, thatched roofs provided inadequate protection against the relentless cold. From peasants to princesses, everyone felt the bite of Jack Frost, nipping at their noses and numbing their limbs. But some were fortunate enough to have a roaring hearth to gather around. The crackle of the flames and the smell of smoke provided a small consolation against winter's assault. In the castles of the nobility, great hall fireplaces consumed vast amounts of wood, tended by shivering servants whose work never ceased. But even the mightiest noble hesitated to venture beyond the fire's glow, for the winter cold found a way to pierce even the thickest stone walls and the richest furs. For those of lower station, the season brought a particularly grim and arduous struggle for survival. Their roughly hewn huts offered few comforts of living. Meager rations of peat or wood gathered from the forest barely fed a sputtering hearth. Families crowded together in unhealthy proximity, sharing body heat and breathing air thick with smoke and the stench of unwashed humanity. It was a bleak existence, to be sure, and yet, even amidst such deprivation, moments of joy could be found. The glow of a communal fire in the village square drew people out of their hovels. Gathered around the leaping flames, neighbors exchanged jests and jibes, stories and songs, the harsh realities of winter seeming distant for a brief respite. Young lovers stole secret kisses, their ardor undampened by the cold. Children shrieked with joy as they scurried across frozen ponds. Even the elderly felt the weight of their years lift for a while as they were transported back to the carefree winters of their youth. Such cheerful interludes were all the more precious for their rarity. Against winter's relentless and unforgiving assault, thoughts soon turned to empty bellies and the gnawing hunger that was the constant companion of the poor. The abundance of spring seemed a cruel taunt while the fields lay barren under a blanket of snow. The specter of famine loomed large in these difficult times. A failed harvest could mean disaster for entire villages. Many a mother watched with anguish as her children's cheeks grew hollow and their eyes dulled with the vacant stare of hunger. The grim accounting of famine bred a particular kind of desperation. Stories abounded of the depraved lengths some would go to fill their bellies, supernatural acts that haunted the nightmares of the pious. Hunger was not the only blight that stalked the land. Winter's cold breath led to a host of diseases that preyed upon the weakened populace. The rattling cough of pneumonia echoed in many a hut as loved ones looked on helplessly. Smallpox and dysentery spread unchecked, wiping out whole families. The very old and the very young were especially vulnerable. Their fragile bodies were simply not equipped to withstand winter's ravages. But perhaps the greatest cruelty was reserved for those forced to venture out into the teeth of winter's rage. Travelers risked life and limb on treacherous, icy paths. Many an unfortunate soul perished, swallowed by blinding blizzards or tumbling into deep snowdrifts, their frozen corpses remaining undiscovered until the spring thaw, a grim reminder of winter's deadly power. Even brave knights, those stalwart warriors of the realm, were not exempt from winter's deprivations. In their heavy armor, they were easy prey to the bone-chilling cold that seeped through every crevice and rivet. Numbed hands, clumsy in frozen gauntlets, fumbled awkwardly with sword and shield. Once magnificent charges faltered in deep snowdrifts, their breath forming icicles on their beards. Great and small alike cursed winter's name in the halls of power. The crown weighed heavily on royal brows, for not even a monarch could reverse the relentless turn of the seasons. The cost of keeping the palace supplied with provisions and firewood was staggering. While the royal treasury groaned under the strain, greedy merchants made a hefty profit from the king's favor. But for all the misery it caused, winter's reign was not eternal. Clinging to despair, the people held fast to the sweet promise of spring's renewal. The festive season surrounding Christmas and the feast of Saint Stephen on December 26 provided a welcome spark of joy and hope. For a few days, the normal social order was cheerfully turned upside down. A peasant was appointed as the Lord of Misrule, presiding over a spectacle filled with feasting, dancing, games, and general merriment. Laughter, that balm to the weary soul, echoed across the frozen land. In time, winter's fierce grip began to pass. Icicles dripped from the eaves as the subtle magic of the strengthening sun worked upon them. Snowdrops and crocuses pushed through the softening earth, the delicate harbingers of winter's retreat. The land stirred from its months-long frozen slumber, teeming with new life. Hearts lifted, and voices joined in joyful celebration. Plough Monday heralded the triumphant return of spring's green splendor. The cycle of sowing and renewal began again as sleek oxen pulled gleaming plowshares through the rich, dark soil. The arduous days of winter were soon forgotten as the fields rippled with the green and golden abundance of the earth. Looking back from centuries hence, we marvel at the fortitude of our medieval ancestors. They endured merciless winter after merciless winter with a stoicism born of necessity. The strength of their spirit and the unbreakable bonds of their community were the secret to their survival in the face of unimaginable hardship. They found pockets of hope and shared humanity. So the next time we complain about the inconvenience of a delayed flight or the indignity of muddy streets, let us pause for a moment and reflect. Our modern winter woes are but a shadow of what once was. The icy trials of the Middle Ages loom large in the tapestry of human history, reminding us of our species' remarkable resilience and the value of a warm hearth and a full belly. As we drift off to sleep, let us spare a thought for those who came before us. Perhaps in our dreams, we might catch a fleeting glimpse of their world, harsher, more merciless than our own, yet a world where the human spirit shone all the brighter for the darkness that surrounded it. Good night, and may you have sweet dreams of gentle spring breezes to come. And as the last light gutters out and the wind whispers its bitter, snow-laced lullaby, I invite you to let your imagination wander across the ages. Let it walk beside those distant ancestors who triumphed over winter's icy deluge. May their courage and indomitable spirit inspire your dreams tonight. And if this journey into history has piqued your curiosity, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more calming stories to lull you into a peaceful sleep. Until next time, my friends, sleep well, and dream of warm hearths and fresh green shoots stirring beneath the snow. Good night.